Appreciate you being here. Thanks for everybody who came to the uh, preservation conference and our quarterly training last week in Independence. Want to make sure and thank Tricia for hosting us Wednesday night. The Main Street directors, it was great being in their office, and especially want to thank Tabitha for everything that she did to make that happen. She was always doing something to make sure coffee was staying fresh and refreshments were in place. And then want to thank the SHPO office for everything they did. It was great working with them and seeing them, and we look forward to just continuing to strengthen that relationship and work with them more in the future. So continuing on the design theme, this Main Street Monday is Robert's. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him, and then we'll get things moving. So Robert, it's all yours.
Well, good morning. Yeah, it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. Looks like a small group, so I'm just going to say, if you have questions while I'm going through this, just ask them, because this small of a group, we can certainly accommodate any questions, but let's get going. So I was going to talk a little bit about infill design today, and infill, basically projects that something's happened to a building, you've lost it for whatever reason, and it has to be, should be like infilled back in. This is one of my favorite infill projects I've ever seen. This is in Stoughton, Virginia, probably the narrowest building I've ever seen. So anyway, kind of an interesting infill. It's been there a long time, but it was obviously built after the other two buildings. Let's see. So some reasons for needing infill might be demolition by neglect. Another reason might be tornado or storm damage, which was the case in this situation. Sometimes we do infill just because we need a higher or better use on a site. Not sure what the cause of this opening for an infill site was, but sometimes we just need a bigger or better building. But anyway, the Main Street document, Keeping Up Appearances, actually gives us a good set of guidelines for designing an infill building. Basically, this type of building fills the hole in the built environment, and it's called infill. Oftentimes, you want to look to your surroundings to determine what might be the cues you need for building an infill building. We don't want to basically create a false history by making a building that looks exactly like the buildings next door. It should look like it's built of its time, but on the other hand, using the cues from the neighbors can make for a much better contiguous Main Street. This is an example of going a very, very contemporary route. But it does a lot of good things. It lines up with the floors adjacent to it. It maintains a storefront. It's not sticking out like a sore thumb because it's painted a dark color. You can actually see the brick from the adjacent buildings through the glass. So it's kind of a contemporary version of doing infill. This one was in Denver, Colorado. It's not everybody's cup of tea though, because it's so modern. But if we go down into the sort of different guidelines, one of the first things you can do to make an infill project more compatible is use a consistent height. So not too short or not too tall. So after each one of these, I will show you an example of, here's one that is obviously too tall for its neighborhood. If that building was just one story shorter, it would be fairly compatible. I mean, I'd have some problems with it, but at least it would be consistent with its neighbors. So that's probably the most prominent thing that you can do, is matching the height. So that's listed first. Width is important, but sometimes we can't control the width of the actual lot that we have to work with. But what we can do is make it match the bay width of the buildings adjacent. So if you have a triple wide lot, break that facade down into 3 different pieces, so it looks like it fits in with its neighbors. This would be an example. This was actually a building that was proposed for a main street on the top. And this was actually our response to that building, was to do a building that was broken up into bays that would be more fitting of a Main Street type building. It wouldn't be confused with its neighbors as being the same age, but it has all those elements of basically a downtown building, a bulkhead, a transom, a display window, awnings, and because the site didn't quite fit the number of bays didn't quite fit the site, we did like a little unusual smaller bay that actually became the entrance of the building. Proportion is a big thing, and here we're talking about the overall proportion of the building. You don't want to build a short and wide building in the middle of a bunch of 2 and 3 story buildings, because it will be out of character because of proportion. Here's an example of a building. This is probably infill from the 60s. So whoever did this is long gone, but you can see this was mostly a main street with 2 and 3 story buildings. And some of those buildings were wide, but because this is wide and only 1 story, it doesn't fit in particularly well on the main street. Relationship to the street is also important. And this is one we actually do see fairly often, this mistake that a building is built on a main street and it's set back from the rest of the buildings. And that can create its own set of problems. But this is an example where a building was built set back. I used both pictures because you can see there's some examples on the left of infill that was done maybe a little earlier than the mansard roof building, but it was done in a way that was fitting in its downtown. But this building has kind of a courtyard in front of it, and actually really just serves as a big leaf catcher. And we could also maybe critique this building a little bit, that its roof form doesn't conform to a Main Street kind of dialogue of buildings. And that actually brings us to our next point about infill, the roof and cornice forms. As you can see, the little infill building shown on the left of this diagram would be the same height and flat roof, but then doing these exaggerated parapets don't necessarily fit in. This isn't One we can find a lot of examples of in Kansas. This happens to be a European example, but it's on a street where most of the buildings are 3 floors exposed, and then a 4th floor and a mansard. And you can see just a tiny bit of that on the right side of this image. But putting these buildings in with big exaggerated gables just wasn't really fitting in this context. Composition, infill facades should be similar to the buildings that are surrounding it. So you want to look at how the composition is, where the cornice line is, where the tops of the storefronts might be aligning, and pick up on those cues. This is an example of a building where you can see there was a strong horizontal cornice line. There was a midpoint sort of storefront cornice, a sign band, transoms that are all high. And while I give the designer of this building points for putting a storefront in the front of this apartment building, that storefront doesn't really align with the existing storefronts. It has a much more vertical element there on the left. So not a great infill building. Next, we talk about rhythms. Rhythms that carry out through the block. That can be the rhythms of the storefronts or the rhythm of windows on the 2nd and 3rd floor. Here's an example of a building that used very narrow slot windows that don't really fit the rhythm of the main street. So while it's great that this corner lot is filled, we would have liked this a lot better if it had your sort of conventional display windows on the front instead of these slot windows. Proportions of openings are important. That's both, again, the storefront and the window openings above the storefront. Here's a building. I give this building lots of props that they broke the facade down into smaller pieces to be more fitting. I love that it's brick and stone, but the window openings could have been done a lot better to make it more fitting with its neighbors. It gets a little bit of a pass because it's more of a public, it's an art center, so we'll give this a little pass because of that. But it could have been done with window openings that would be much more fitting of the main street. Materials are important. So if you have an entire row of buildings that are brick and suddenly there's one that's a metal facade or something, that can be very, it can stick out. So here's an example. This one's actually from Cheyenne, Wyoming, where a sort of, and this might not be an infill, this might be a slip cover, but it's hard to tell from this photo. But obviously the turquoise panels don't fit in with this brick neighborhood of Main Street buildings. Also color, that previous one, the color was part of what makes it stick out, but color is important. So you want to make sure that you're not doing something that sticks out. And here would be something where you have a whole row of dark buildings, traditional buildings, and then you do a white facade. That could be very jarring and not be a good example of some infill. So let's that sort of is the 10 steps for infill that Keeping Up Appearances talks about. Wanted to look at maybe a couple good and bad examples. This is a bad example of infill. Has inappropriate floor heights. As you can see, the second floor windows don't really line up with its neighboring buildings. It has vinyl windows, has residential doors, wood shingle siding, corrugated metal siding, and it's just all an inappropriate scale. Here's an example of good infill, although this was a Greensburg, Kansas, where the town was basically blown away by a tornado. So this was the first of the buildings to go back in on Main Street, but they just used an economical pre-engineered steel building. It's just a shed version instead of a gabled version. They did do a brick front facade. This was built actually by a faith-based organization. So you can see the little cross on the top of the piers. The brick front facade is very appropriate. It has the proper relationship to the street, Main Street appropriate facade, and it breaks that facade, which is too wide for the lot, into 2 units, which is appropriate. And also each of the 2 units has that standard display window, transom, bulkhead, awning that you're used to seeing on a main street. So props to them for really getting this front facade right. And we don't worry too much about the side facades, because the hope is that other buildings will fill in around that. So next, wanted to talk about design assistance. This is a reminder that when we're doing this is really conceptual only. It's intended to provide guidance and or education, assist DIYers, do-it-yourselfers, provide a visualization, and really to get the ball rolling, or we like to say tee up a project to take it to the next level. Our design assistance isn't really for full construction documents. It's not a substitute for other professionals such as architects or engineers. And here is my contact information, as well as Scott and Shelley's. If you do have a design project, you can reach out to me, but we're going to take a look today at the new design assistance application form. And so this is your last Main Street refresh. There was a link here, and if you click this link, it will take you to a new submittable form. And Shelley, can we still see that? The Kansas Department of Commerce?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
there.
Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes.
The first thing you'll do once you click that link, and we won't click that, it won't happen because I'm already a registered user, is you will have to become a registered user of Kansas Department of Commerce. All it means is you put your name, your email address in there twice to make sure you're typing it in right, and a password twice, and then hit enter, and that will take you to this page. And all you're going to do is come in here and add your address, add a city. You do have to type in the state or click the state, and put your zip code in. I think United States defaults on this particular field, and then put in a phone number, and that will save your contact information so that we can get in touch with you. Then the date of the application, you'll put that in. You just click on that, and it'll be a drop down to click like today's date. And then we need you to put in like a deadline for your assistance. We'd love for you guys to give us as much time as possible because we do have a queue of a few projects, but we'd like you to, give us a month or two to try to have some time to get back to you with a solution. You're going to type in your name, first name, your last name, what city the main street is in, and phone number for the applicant. Then you will also type in your email address again, because the first email address was just for your login part. And then we need you to check whether you're the property owner, tenant, or perhaps the main street director. Sometimes you might be both owner and tenant or other. And then we have a list of services that we're really providing here for design assistance for Main Street people. And so all of these are explained in the description here: signage, education consultation. Maybe you have a lot of a particular problem and you want us to come in and talk to your building owners. We can do downtown, just a design walkthrough, maybe a consultation on slipcover or whatever, but you pick up here. It might be a facade. Let's say it's facade storefront consultation, but it's also a slipcover removal. So you can check more than one box there. And then just briefly describe what the work is going to entail. Give me a name of the business or its current use. Give it a historic property name if it has one. It may be the McGill building or something like that. And then the actual property address will be down here. Again, the city and state and approximate square footage of the building. If you know it, we'd love to know the original date of construction of the building, and we'll give you some tips on how to find that here as well in the form. If it had any significant modifications, maybe additions or storefront remodel. Tell us the current building use, what it currently is, and then what the proposed use is. And the reason we're asking that is because that can make a difference on some of your code issues with the building. If the building was used for residential, it might not be as easy to take it back to a commercial use or vice versa. So that's why we need to know what the old use and the new use is. We also need to know if it's a historic, national historic registered building or a state historic building, which would be this box. We also need to know if it's going to be, perhaps it's not individually listed, but it's in a historic district. We'll need to know that as well. So there's a little tweak we have to make, that the historic district will actually be a different checkbox here. So also need to know if it's a certified local government. If you check that box, it pops up to state or local review. if you don't know, just say, I don't know. But if you do know, or you ask your Main Street director, we'd love to know that information. And then if it is in a historic district, we want to know, is it contributing or non-contributing? And if you do happen to be in a location that has a local historic designation, we want you to explain what that is. We'd love to have what your approximate budget is. You can click that, but it's much easier to just highlight it and type it. Funding sources and amounts. If you're getting, let's say you're getting CDBG money, and you're getting 100,000 from CDBG, you would put that in there. We'd also like to know if you're applying for historic or state historic tax credits. In this case, let's say it's both. Or if you're not, just check not applying. Is funding available for this project? We want to know for sure that that's, we're not just designing something that's no chance of that being funded. Construction start date. Hopefully you're giving us a couple months to turn something around to you, but we want to know if there is a deadline to start construction or end construction. We want to know what it is. And if there is an architect or an engineer involved, you would check that. Once you check that, it will pop up a field for you to type up in their name and phone number. Does this request relate to a project in your Main Streets organization annual work plan? Hopefully that's a yes, but still could be a no. And then we're going to ask that you add photos. And so you would go to your hard drive. Hopefully you have some photos of that building. So you would just double click on that. It's going to load up the photo. So these would be for current photos. And then here you would try to find existing photos. Let's choose a different project. So we might have, so I happen to have some old photos of this project. So I upload those as well so that we might know the history of the project, kind of what it looks like over time. And then there's another field for you to basically upload any construction budgets, any other information that you want to load to show to us. And then the last thing is just click apply. If you didn't check a box, it will come back and flag it. We'll just turn that off. Click apply and success. It gives you a message that you successfully uploaded that. So at that point, then I have it in kind of a spreadsheet that I can go and keep track of all of my design projects. And, once I get it, we'll confirm and sort of fit it into our schedule, make sure we can meet your deadlines. And anyway, that's the situation for the new form to upload our basically design requests. Does anybody out there have any questions?
I had a couple of things I wanted to mention as you walk through that, Robert. When you click on the link and it pulls up a page, you're actually creating that account for submittable. It's not a Department of Commerce thing. You're not like signing up to our agency. You're actually signing up to create a submittable account, which is the program we use for all these applications. And so make sure you keep that login information, because you can go back into submittable and do a lot of things, not just with these design requests, but with HEAL applications. We're using it for that and for some other programs as well. And then I noticed as we went through this, if you see a red asterisk by the item, that's a required field that you have to complete. But we will probably tweak this. So for example, if you have a request for Robert to do some committee training with your design committee, we'll probably make it so if you check that box, you don't have to fill out the project budget and the project information, because it's not really a building that's going to be a rendering, or work done for. So we'll probably tweak it a little bit. But for now, if you want, design assistance for your design training for your committee, and you check that box, just put in kind of dummy information for the rest of that. But we'll try and fix that as soon as possible. Does that make sense, Robert? You know
Yep.
what I'm
Yeah, I do know what you mean, that it's not a project that has an architect and
right.
is on the National Register or whatever.
Yeah, and
So
then
if
that
you
brings
click-
up, oh, go ahead.
So if you click sort of request for something that doesn't have all of those things, those boxes aren't visible even. So
Right. We'll tweak that form. And then that brings up the last point I wanted to make, is that make sure you pay attention, because sometimes if you check a box, it will bring up other options that aren't there. So
yeah,
make sure you're keeping an eye on that. But it's pretty straightforward, I think. And we'll tweak a few things in that form here soon, and should be good to go. So now, other questions, comments? Coral.
I have a question. Yes. So obviously there would be priority to those that have an ongoing project or have a grant that they're going to be applying for and stuff for, but would it still be possible to request the assistance for a project that we want to have drawings, so we want to have a plan so that we are able to apply for some grants? Because a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is requesting these things in advance. So there's not going to be a budget involved. Does that make
right.
sense?
It does make sense. And I think in those cases, you would just type in unknown. We do recognize that there's going to be some projects that don't have a specific client or a specific building use in mind, but you're wanting to basically show what's possible to a potential owner, somebody buying the building. And you can on the budget just say unknown, but you should give us a description of the work and probably call us separately that, okay, here's the situation on this building. Because if there's a deadline, it is going to get priority over something that's, more or less a marketing piece or something like that. Or if it's something for a grant application, it'll probably have priority.
Yeah. And I'm not thinking necessarily for marketing. Like I can think of the Beeson Theater. There's an owner for it. He hasn't been able, he's asked for inside pictures and they're very hard to try to find because it's had so many different uses. But if we had drawings and we had something, then it'd make it easier for us to be able to apply for grants and funding and stuff. So.
Right. And we'll work with you. It's going to create a priority is basically what it comes down to. So just let us know what the situation is and we'll work with you, Coral.
I think we also should mention, since these calls are open to anybody, this service is only available right now to designated Main Street communities. It's not available to affiliates or anybody that's not in a designated community. That may change at some point, but right now it's just open to designated communities.